We're so happy to have you here, and today's story is one we think you'll really enjoy. So without further ado, let's begin. The grand ballroom of the Westview Hotel sparkled with an air of opulence and expectation. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the sea of cocktail dresses and tailored suits, their light reflecting off the polished surfaces of donation boxes strategically placed throughout the room. Banners proclaiming, "Building Our Future." Westview High School expansion project hung from the ornate ceiling, leaving no doubt about the evening's purpose. John Matthews adjusted his tie nervously as he entered the room, his wife Sarah's hand resting lightly on his arm. After 15 years of teaching English at Westview High, he still felt out of place at these high society functions. Sarah, on the other hand, seemed to thrive in this environment. Her success as a real estate agent had honed her networking skills to a fine edge, and she moved through the crowd with practiced ease. "Relax, honey," Sarah whispered, giving John's arm a reassuring squeeze. "Remember, we're here for the kids. Just smile and nod, and let me do the talking." John nodded, forcing a smile as they made their way to the bar. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was a fish out of water, surrounded by the town's elite, doctors, lawyers, and business moguls whose children filled his classroom. As a teacher, he was used to being the authority figure, but here, he felt like an imposter in a rented tuxedo. As Sarah chatted animatedly with a group of potential donors, John's attention was drawn to a commotion near the entrance. Principal Robert Thompson had arrived, fashionably late as usual, his booming laugh cutting through the genteel murmur of conversation. John watched as Thompson worked the room, clapping shoulders and air-kissing cheeks with the practiced charm of a seasoned politician. "John, my boy!" Thompson's voice carried across the ballroom as he spotted the English teacher. "Come here, I want to introduce you to someone." With a sigh, John excused himself from Sarah's side and made his way towards his boss. As he drew closer, the smell of expensive scotch wafted from Thompson's breath, and John noticed a slight sway in the principal's stance. "John, have you met Mr. Goldstein?" Thompson gestured grandly towards a portly man with thinning gray hair. "He's considering a very generous donation to our little project." John shook Mr. Goldstein's hand, murmuring polite greetings. He launched into a well-rehearsed speech about the importance of education and the positive impact the expansion would have on the students, all the while acutely aware of Thompson's eyes roving the room, barely paying attention to the conversation. As Mr. Goldstein excused himself to refill his drink, Thompson's demeanor changed. He leaned in close to John, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "John, my friend, I've been meaning to talk to you about something important." The change in Thompson's tone set John on edge. He'd seen this side of the principal before. The side that came out after a few too many drinks, when his already loose understanding of professional boundaries seemed to evaporate completely. "You see, John," Thompson continued, his words slightly slurred, "I've been thinking about the future of our little school, and I think it's time for some changes." John's stomach tightened. "Changes, sir?" Thompson's eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity. "Yes, changes. Big changes. And I think you and that lovely wife of yours could play a big part in them." Before John could respond, he felt a familiar touch on his arm. Sarah had appeared at his side, her smile dazzling as she greeted the principal. "Mr. Thompson, I hope you're enjoying the evening." Thompson's face lit up at the sight of Sarah, his gaze lingering a moment too long on her figure-hugging dress. "Mrs. Matthews, you're looking absolutely radiant tonight. In fact, I was just telling your husband here about an exciting opportunity one have in mind." John watched in growing discomfort as Thompson turned his charm offensive on Sarah. The principal's body language shifted, angling towards her, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "You see, Sarah, may I call you Sarah? We're in need of a new vice principal, someone with real-world experience and a fresh perspective. Someone like you." Sarah's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Me? But I'm not an educator, Mr. Thompson. I'm in real estate." Thompson waved his hand dismissively. "Details, my dear. What we need is someone with your drive, your people skills. And think of the connections you could bring to our little school. John felt as if he were watching the scene unfold from outside his body. He opened his mouth to interject, but Thompson barreled on, his words becoming more outrageous with each passing moment. Of course, we'd have to make it worth your while. I'm thinking double John's current salary. He could stay at home, relax, maybe work on that novel he's always talking about. What do you say? John waited for Sarah to laugh off the absurd proposition, to politely but firmly put Thompson in his place. Instead, to his utter disbelief, she giggled, a high, girlish sound he'd never heard from her before. "Oh, Mr. Thompson," Sarah cooed, reaching out to place her hand on the principal's arm. "That sounds absolutely fascinating. Why don't we discuss the details somewhere a bit more private?" Thompson's face split into a wolfish grin. "I thought you'd never ask, my dear. I happen to have a suite upstairs. For meetings, you understand." As Thompson led Sarah away, her hand still resting on his arm, she threw a glance over her shoulder at John. For a split second, he thought he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt, excitement. Before he could process it, they had disappeared in the crowd, leaving John standing alone, frozen in shock. The rest of the evening passed in a blur for John. He moved through the ballroom on autopilot, shaking hands and making small talk, all the while acutely aware of the whispers and sidelong glances from his colleagues. It was clear from their reactions that this wasn't the first time Thompson had made such a brazen move, nor was it likely to be the last. As he accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, John overheard a snippet of conversation between two of the school's veteran teachers. "Can't believe Thompson's at it again," the math teacher, Mrs. Hendricks, muttered behind her hand. Her companion, the gruff football coach, Mr. Daniels, snorted. "What did you expect? Man's been pulling this shit for years. Remember that incident with the Parent-Teacher Association president?" John felt his cheeks burn with a mixture of shame and anger. How long had this been going on, and how had he been so blind to it? As the night wore on, John found himself drawn into conversations with parents and donors, his teacher's instinct kicking in as he passionately explained the need for updated facilities and expanded programs. But beneath his calm exterior, his mind was racing, replaying every interaction he'd ever had with Thompson, every oddly worded email, every closed-door meeting. When the last of the guests had finally trickled out, John found himself standing alone in the hotel lobby, Sarah's car keys heavy in his pocket. She had pressed them into his hand hours earlier, whispering something about important business discussions before disappearing back into the crowd. The drive home was a surreal experience. The familiar streets of their small town seemed alien in the pre-dawn light, as if John were seeing them for the first time. By the time he pulled into their driveway, the first rays of sunlight were beginning to peek over the horizon. Inside the house, John moved on autopilot. He loosened his tie, kicked off his shoes, and made his way to his home office. There, surrounded by bookshelves filled with the classic literature he so loved to teach, he booted up his computer and began to search. Hours passed as John delved deeper and deeper into a rabbit hole of old emails, text messages, and bank statements. With each new piece of information, the knot in his stomach grew tighter. Unexplained deposits in their joint account, late-night text messages from unknown numbers, vague explanations for missed dinners and weekend work events. As the truth began to take shape, John felt a cold, creeping numbness settle over him. The life he thought he knew, the marriage he had believed in for 12 years, was crumbling before his eyes. The sound of a key in the lock jolted John from his revelations. Glancing at the clock, he realized it was nearly dawn. He listened as Sarah tried to sneak in, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floors. Taking a deep breath, John stood and made his way to the living room. There he found Sarah, her hair disheveled and her makeup smudged, trying to slip off her shoes without making a sound. Late night, John's voice, calm and controlled, cut through the silence like a knife. Sarah jumped, nearly losing her balance. "John, I didn't think you'd still be up. Clearly, John replied, his tone icy. Did you have a productive meeting with Principal Thompson? Sarah's face paled, then flushed. It's not what you think, John. We were just discussing school business. Fundraising strategies, you know? At dawn, in a hotel room, John's voice remained eerily calm, betraying none of the turmoil roiling inside him. It's harmless flirting, John, for the good of the school. You know how these things work. Sometimes you have to play the game to get ahead. As if on cue, Sarah's phone buzzed. John watched as she instinctively reached for it, then froze as she saw the notification on the screen. Last night was amazing, John read aloud, his voice devoid of emotion. Can't wait for our weekend getaway. Sounds like quite the fundraising strategy, Sarah. Sarah's composure crumbled. Tears welled up in her eyes as she sank onto the couch. John, I can explain. No need. John cut her off. I've spent the night explaining it to myself. 6 months of unexplained income, late night meetings, and now a promotion to vice principal dangled in front of you like a carrot. Tell me, Sarah, was it worth it? Sarah's sobs filled the room as she poured out a confession that confirmed John's worst fears. The affair with Thompson, the promises of career advancement, the cooperation with wealthy donors. It all came tumbling out in a torrent of guilt and justification. John listened in silence, his face an impassive mask. When Sarah finally ran out of words, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I've heard enough, he said, reaching into his briefcase. I think you should read this. Sarah took the document with trembling hands, her eyes widening as she realized what she was holding. Divorce papers? John, no. Please, we can work this out. But John had already turned away, heading towards his office. The sound of the door locking behind him was like a final punctuation mark on their marriage. Inside the sanctuary of his office, surrounded by the books and memories of a life that now seemed like a distant dream, John allowed himself a moment of weakness. A single tear rolled down his cheek as he sank into his chair. But as quickly as it had come, the moment passed. John's eyes hardened, his jaw set with determination. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write, the first steps of a plan taking shape beneath his pen. The life he had known was over, but from its ashes, a new John Matthews would rise, one fueled by a thirst for justice and an unquenchable desire for revenge. The early morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of John's home office, casting long shadows across the room. He sat at his desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and an open laptop, his eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night of investigation. The distant sound of Sarah's muffled sobs echoed from the living room, a constant reminder of the shattered reality he now faced. John's fingers flew across the keyboard as he delved deeper into their financial records, each new discovery adding another crack to the foundation of trust he had built his life upon. Bank statements revealed a pattern of deposits from unknown sources, always just below the threshold that would trigger automatic reporting. Email threads hinted at clandestine meetings and veiled promises of career advancement. As he pieced together the timeline of deception, John couldn't help but marvel at the intricate web of lies Sarah had woven. How long had this been going on? How deep did the corruption run? The more he uncovered, the more he realized that this went far beyond a simple affair. A notification on his phone caught his attention, a calendar reminder for a faculty meeting later that morning. The thought of facing his colleagues, of sitting across from Thompson and pretending everything was normal, made his stomach churn. With a few quick taps, he composed an email to the school administration, citing a family emergency and requesting a leave of absence. The sound of the front door opening and closing jolted John from his thoughts. Sarah had finally left, probably to seek solace with a friend or to continue her charade at work. The house fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the soft hum of John's computer. As the day wore on, John's shock slowly gave way to a simmering anger. He had dedicated 15 years of his life to shaping young minds, to instilling values of honesty and integrity in his students. And all the while, the very institution he served had been rotting from within. The ping of an incoming email drew his attention back to the screen. It was from Thompson, a group message to the faculty expressing concern over John's sudden absence and wishing him well. The oozing insincerity of the words made John's blood boil. Unable to bear the confines of the house any longer, John grabbed his keys and headed for the door. He needed space, time to think, to plan his next move. As he backed out of the driveway, a thought struck him, a memory of a place that had always brought him peace in times of turmoil. The drive to his family's lakeside cabin was a blur of winding roads and autumn foliage. John barely registered the familiar landmarks as he pushed his car to its limits, his mind racing faster than the speedometer. By the time he pulled up to the weathered wooden structure, the sun was already dipping below the tree-line, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. The cabin had stood empty for years, a relic of happier times when his parents were still alive. As John fumbled with the rusty key, he was struck by a wave of nostalgia. Summers spent fishing with his father, evenings around the campfire telling ghost stories, the simple joy of a family untouched by the complexities of adult life. Inside, a thick layer of dust covered every surface, the air heavy with the musty smell of disuse. John made his way to the small kitchen, rummaging through drawers until he found what he was looking for, a bottle opener. He returned to the porch, cracking open a beer from the six-pack he grabbed on the drive up. As he sat on the worn steps, watching the last rays of sunlight dance across the lake's surface, John allowed himself to truly feel the weight of his situation for the first time. The betrayal, the anger, the overwhelming sense of loss. It all came crashing down on him at once. A strangled sob escaped his throat, echoing across the still water. For hours, John sat there, alternating between moments of quiet contemplation and bursts of raw emotion. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, a strange calm settled over him. He realized that he had a choice to make. He could let this experience break him, or he could use it as fuel to forge himself anew. With renewed purpose, John returned to the cabin. He would spend the night here, away from the suffocating memories of his old life. In the morning, he would begin the process of rebuilding, not just his life, but his very sense of self. As he prepared for bed, a glint of metal caught his eye. Behind a loose floorboard in the master bedroom, John discovered an old safe he had long forgotten about. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "Son, always have a backup plan. You never know when you might need it." With trembling hands, John entered the combination, his mother's birthday. The safe creaked open, revealing a stack of yellowed documents. As he began to sift through them, his eyes widened. These weren't just old family papers. They were property deeds, survey maps, and correspondence that painted a picture of unexpected wealth. John spent the night poring over the documents, his mind racing with the implications. By dawn, he had pieced together a staggering truth. His family's modest lakeside cabin sat on a parcel of land far more valuable than he'd ever imagined. As the sun rose over the lake, John's phone buzzed. It was Sarah. He stared at the screen, watching it ring until the call went to voicemail. He wasn't ready to face her yet. John packed up the documents and headed back to town. The drive gave him time to think, to process not just the revelation about the land, but the shattering of his marriage. Arriving home, John found Sarah waiting for him. She looked terrible, disheveled, eyes red from crying, still wearing last night's clothes. "John, please," she began as soon as he walked in. "Let me explain. It's not what you think." John's voice was eerily calm as he replied, "I think it's exactly what I think." With time and space to think, John drove back to the lakeside cabin. The property that had always been a source of fond memories now represented something else entirely: opportunity. John spent days researching the school district's expansion plans, cross-referencing them with local zoning laws and development proposals. The more he dug, the clearer it became. His family's land wasn't just valuable, it was crucial to the school's proposed new campus. As the pieces began to fall into place, John realized he needed an ally, someone with expertise in real estate development. His thoughts turned to Melissa Chun, a college friend he hadn't spoken to in years. Last he'd heard, Melissa had become a cutthroat real estate developer with a reputation for getting results. John's call to Melissa was a calculated risk. He laid out the basics of his situation: the valuable land, the school's expansion plans, carefully omitting the personal details of his crumbling marriage and Thompson's indiscretions. Melissa listened intently, her sharp mind quickly grasping the potential of the situation. "John, my friend," she said after he'd finished, "you're sitting on a gold mine, but navigating these waters can be tricky. One wrong move, and you could lose everything." "That's why I called you," John replied. "I need a partner in this, someone who knows the game. I'm willing to split the profits if you'll help me maximize the potential of this land." Melissa's response was quick and decisive. "You know what? I'm in. This could be fun. But John, are you sure you're ready for this? It's not going to be pretty." John's jaw clenched as he thought of Sarah's betrayal, of Thompson's smug face. "Trust me, Melissa. I'm ready." With Melissa on board, John's plan began to take shape. But he knew that to truly bring down Thompson and the corrupt system he represented, he needed more than just leverage. He needed evidence. Over the next few days, John carefully reached out to former colleagues, probing for information about Thompson's conduct. He was surprised at how readily some of them opened up, sharing stories of inappropriate behavior and questionable financial decisions. It seemed many had been waiting for someone to finally take a stand. One evening, as John was compiling his notes, he received an anonymous email. The sender, identifying themselves only as a concerned staff member, provided a trove of information: records of misappropriated funds, testimonies from female staff members who had felt uncomfortable around Thompson, and hints of larger-scale corruption within the administration. John's heart raced as he realized the implications of what he now possessed. This was more than just personal revenge. He had the power to expose a systemic problem that had been festering for years. With this newfound information, John took a calculated risk. He composed an email to a local investigative journalist he had met at a school function years ago. The message was carefully crafted, hinting at potential corruption within the school administration without providing specifics. It was enough, he hoped, to pique the journalist's interest without showing his full hand. As the week drew to a close, John sat at his desk, staring at a blank document on his computer screen. It was time for the final piece of his opening gambit, his resignation letter. He began to type, carefully choosing each word. The letter was a masterpiece of subtlety, expressing regret at leaving a job he loved while hinting at concerns about the direction of the school's leadership. He knew it would raise eyebrows among the school board members, planting seeds of doubt that he could later exploit. John scheduled the email to be sent first thing Monday morning, timing it for maximum impact. As he hit the schedule button, a sense of finality washed over him. There was no going back now. A month had passed since John Matthews had disappeared from the halls of Westview High School. The initial shock of his abrupt resignation had given way to whispered speculation and uneasy glances among the faculty. Principal Robert Thompson, however, seemed unperturbed, even buoyant, as he strode through the school with an air of renewed confidence. It was on a crisp autumn morning that John's name resurfaced in an unexpected way. The school board members were settling into their monthly meeting when the secretary announced an unscheduled visitor. Heads turned as John Matthews walked in, looking sharper and more self-assured than anyone remembered. "Mr. Matthews," Board President Eleanor Simmons said, surprise evident in her voice. "This is unexpected. What brings you here today?" John's smile was warm, but carried an edge that made a few board members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "I appreciate you taking the time to see me," he began. "I know my departure was abrupt, and I owe you an explanation. But more than that, I'm here to make an offer that I believe will be of great interest to the board and the future of Westview High." For the next hour, John laid out a proposal that left the board members stunned. He offered to donate his family's lakeside property for the school's expansion project, a gift valued at several $1 million. As he spoke, John could see the dollar signs dancing in their eyes, the visions of gleaming new facilities and positive press coverage practically radiating from their faces. "This is extraordinarily generous, Mr. Matthews," Board Member Frankchin said, leaning forward. "But forgive me for asking, why? You left your position here rather suddenly, and now you're offering us a fortune. What's the catch?" John's expression turned somber. "My time at Westview was the best years of my life. The recent changes in my personal circumstances have given me a new perspective on what's truly important. I want to give back to the community that gave me so much." As the board members exchanged glances, John could see them weighing the opportunity against their suspicions. He pressed on, subtly planting seeds of doubt about the current administration's ability to handle such a massive project. "Of course, I understand this is a complex undertaking," John said, his tone carefully modulated. "That's why I've included a clause stating that the current administration must oversee the project to completion. Continuity is key in these matters. Wouldn't you agree?" The board members nodded, not realizing they were being led down a carefully constructed path. John watched as they skimmed over the contract's fine print, their eyes glazing over the cleverly worded clause that would prove to be Thompson's undoing. As the meeting concluded, John shook hands with each board member, noting the excitement in their eyes. He had them hook, line, and sinker. As he turned to leave, he locked eyes with Principal Thompson, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the proceedings. For a brief moment, John saw a flicker of unease cross Thompson's face before it was replaced by his usual confident smile. Outside the boardroom, John's carefully constructed mask slipped for a moment as he leaned against the wall, heart pounding. The first piece of his plan was in place, but the game was far from over. As he walked towards the parking lot, a familiar voice called out behind him, "John? John, wait!" He turned to see Sarah hurrying towards him, her heels clicking on the polished floor. John steeled himself, slipping back into the role he had crafted for this moment. "Sarah," he said, his voice neutral, "I didn't expect to see you here." Sarah's eyes were wide, a mix of hope and wariness in her expression. I heard you were in the building. John, can we talk? Please." For a moment, John allowed himself to remember the woman he had loved, the life they had shared. Then he remembered the betrayal, the lies, and his resolve hardened. "I'm not sure that's a good idea, Sarah," he said, his tone softening just enough to keep her off balance. "Please, John, I know I made mistakes, terrible mistakes. But seeing you here, making this incredible donation, it's reminded me of the man I fell in love with. Can't we at least try to work things out?" John hesitated, appearing to consider her words. Then, with a practiced movement, he reached into his pocket and pressed record on his phone. "All right, Sarah. You want to talk? Let's talk. Tell me about the affair. Tell me about Thompson's pattern of behavior. I want to hear it all, in your own words." Sarah, caught off guard by John's sudden acquiescence, began to speak. As she poured out her confession, detailing Thompson's inappropriate behavior and her own complicity, John felt a twinge of guilt, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the larger goal. As Sarah's words trailed off, John stopped the recording. "Thank you for your honesty, Sarah. I think it's best if we go our separate ways now." He walked away, leaving Sarah standing alone in the hallway, confusion and hurt etched across her face. John didn't look back. He had what he needed. That evening, as John sat in his new apartment, he made a series of carefully orchestrated phone calls. By morning, select details of his generous donation would be circulating in the local press, generating buzz and excitement about the school's expansion plans. He hung up from the last call. The trap was set. Now it was time to watch it spring shut. The groundbreaking ceremony for Westview High School's expansion project was a spectacle of optimism and civic pride. Principal Robert Thompson stood at the podium, his charismatic smile beaming out at the assembled crowd of students, parents, and local dignitaries. Behind him, a large banner proclaimed, "Building Our Future, the Matthews Legacy Campus." "Today marks the beginning of a new era for Westview," Thompson announced, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "Thanks to the incredible generosity of our own John Matthews, we are embarking on a journey that will transform not just our school, but our entire community." From his position at the back of the crowd, John watched the proceedings with a mixture of satisfaction and determination. Beside him stood Melissa Chun, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the event. "You've got them eating out of the palm of your hand," Melissa murmured, a note of admiration in her voice. "Are you ready for Phase 2? John nodded imperceptibly. "Let's get to work." Over the next few weeks, as construction began in earnest on the lakeside property, John and Melissa orchestrated a series of subtle but costly complications. It started small: a shipment of materials delayed due to a clerical error, a minor permit issue that required additional paperwork and fees. From his vantage point as the project's benefactor, John was able to insert himself into meetings and decisions, always under the guise of ensuring his family's legacy was properly honored. Each suggestion he made, each concern he raised, was calculated to cause maximum disruption with minimum suspicion. Melissa's expertise proved invaluable. She knew exactly which strings to pull, which regulations to highlight, to cause the most significant delays and cost overruns. An endangered species of frog was discovered on the property, requiring extensive environmental impact studies. Labor disputes erupted over seemingly minor contract details, grinding work to a halt for days at a time. As the complications mounted, John watched Thompson and the board grow increasingly agitated. Board meetings became tense affairs, with Thompson struggling to explain the mounting delays and ballooning costs. Sarah, now working as Thompson's unofficial assistant, found herself caught in the middle of the growing chaos. John observed her from afar, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the worried frown that seemed permanently etched on her face. One evening, as John was leaving a particularly heated board meeting, he overheard a heated conversation between Sarah and Thompson in an empty classroom. "Robert, these numbers don't add up," Sarah's voice was strained, worried. "We can't keep covering up these discrepancies. The board is starting to ask questions I can't answer." Thompson's reply was sharp, angry. "You let me worry about the board, Sarah. You just keep your mouth shut and do your job. Or have you forgotten our little arrangement? How do you think the board would react if they knew about your role in our donor negotiations?" John's fist clenched at his sides as he listened to the threat in Thompson's voice. For a moment, he was tempted to burst into the room, to confront Thompson then and there. But he held back, reminding himself of the bigger picture. As the weeks turned into months, John's plan continued to unfold. Working through carefully cultivated anonymous sources, he fed information to Megan Reeves, the investigative journalist he had tipped off months ago. Megan's articles started small, seemingly innocuous pieces about the challenges of large-scale school construction projects. But as time went on, her reporting became more pointed, questioning the management of the Westview expansion and hinting at potential improprieties. The pressure began to mount on Thompson and the board. John watched with satisfaction as they made a series of hasty, ill-considered decisions in an attempt to get the project back on track. Each misstep only served to deepen their predicament. It all came to a head on a stormy evening in late autumn. John sat in his apartment, watching the rain lash against the windows as his phone buzzed with an incoming call. "Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow morning." Melissa's voice came through the speaker. "Looks like they're finally ready to face the music." John took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "Thanks, Melissa. I'll be ready." As he hung up the phone, John walked to his desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside lay a thick folder filled with documents, photographs, and transcripts, the culmination of months of careful planning and investigation. Tomorrow, he thought, it all comes crashing down. The atmosphere in the Westview High School boardroom crackled with tension. Board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, stealing glances at Principal Thompson, who sat at the head of the table, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a thin veneer of calm over barely contained panic. "I call this emergency session of the Westview School Board to order," Board President Eleanor Simmons announced, her voice tight. "We're here to address the mounting concerns regarding the expansion project and other related matters." As the meeting began, with board members voicing their concerns about budget overruns and construction delays, the door opened. All heads turned to see John Matthews walk in, a thick folder tucked under his arm. "Mr. Matthews," Thompson said, surprise and a hint of fear in his voice. "This is a closed board meeting. You can't be here." John's smile was cold as he approached the table. "Oh, I think you'll want to hear what I have to say, Robert. All of you will." For the next hour, John laid out his case with surgical precision. He presented financial records showing systematic embezzlement, emails detailing Thompson's inappropriate relationships with staff and donors, and finally, the recording of Sarah's confession. The boardroom was silent save for the occasional gasp or murmur of shock. Thompson's face grew paler with each new revelation, while Sarah, seated in a corner of the room, looked as though she might be sick. As John's presentation reached its climax, he played the recording of Sarah's confession. Her voice, tinged with regret and fear, filled the room. "Thompson promised me the vice principal position if I helped him entertain certain donors. I knew it was wrong, but I was afraid of losing my job, of the scandal if it came out." Sarah's current sobs provided a counterpoint to her recorded voice, creating a surreal atmosphere in the room. Several board members looked away, unable to meet her eyes. As the recording ended, Thompson exploded from his chair, his face contorted with rage. "This is a setup," he shouted, pointing an accusing finger at John. "He's orchestrated this whole thing. Can't you see? He's bitter about his wife, about his job, and he's taking it out on all of us." John remained calm in the face of Thompson's outburst. "Everything I presented is fully documented and verifiable," he said quietly. "I'm sure the authorities will be very interested in examining all of this evidence." The board president's voice shook as she spoke. I think we need to suspend Principal Thompson, pending a full investigation, and we'll need to cooperate fully with law enforcement." As the reality of the situation sank in, Thompson's anger gave way to desperation. "You can't do this," he pleaded. "The expansion project. We're contractually obligated to complete it. It'll ruin the school if we don't." A smile played at the corners of John's mouth as he delivered the final blow. "About that," he said, pulling out the contract from his folder, "you might want to take a closer look at Clause 27B, the one that stipulates the current administration must oversee the project to completion, or the land reverts to my ownership." The implications of John's words hit the room like a thunderbolt. Board members frantically flipped through their copies of the contract, faces falling as they realized the trap they'd walked into. "You planned this from the beginning," Thompson whispered, his voice a mixture of awe and hatred. "You destroyed everything." John met Thompson's gaze steadily. "No, Robert, you destroyed everything. I'm just making sure you face the consequences." As the meeting devolved into chaos, with board members arguing about their legal options and Thompson continuing to protest his innocence, John calmly gathered his materials. He walked to the wall where his Teacher of the Year plaque still hung, took it down, and placed it on the table. Without another word, John walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind a scene of utter disarray. As he stepped into the cool evening air, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The game was over. Justice, or at least his version of it, had been served. But as he drove away from Westview High School for what he knew would be the last time, John couldn't help but wonder about the cost of his revenge. The school he had loved, the students he had devoted his life to teaching, what would become of them in the wake of the scandal? The satisfaction of his victory was tinged with a hint of regret, a question that would haunt him in the days to come. In his quest for vengeance, had he become the very thing he sought to destroy? The quaint town of Westview had always prided itself on its close-knit community and excellent school system, But in the days following the explosive school board meeting, that carefully cultivated image began to crumble like a sandcastle in a rising tide. Local news vans lined the streets, their satellite dishes stretching towards the sky like metal sunflowers. Reporters prowled the sidewalks, accosting anyone who looked even remotely connected to the school. The Westview Gazette, typically filled with feel-good stories and high school sports highlights, now bore dramatic headlines. School scandal rocks community and corruption at the heart of Westview High. In coffee shops and grocery store aisles, at PTA meetings and Little League games, the scandal was all anyone could talk about. The town was divided, with some defending Thompson and others praising John for exposing the corruption. Rumors and speculation spread like wildfire, each retelling of the story more dramatic than the last. Sarah Matthews, once a pillar of the community, now found herself a pariah. As she walked down Main Street, heads turned and whispers followed in her wake. The for sale signs that once dotted lawns across town now seemed to mock her, a reminder of the career she had lost. The notification came via certified mail. Her real estate license had been revoked. The evidence of her role in Thompson's corrupt dealings was too damning to ignore. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, the official letter crumpled in her fist, wondering how her life had unraveled so completely. Meanwhile, Robert Thompson's fall from grace was even more spectacular. Out on bail and facing multiple charges, he had become a recluse, holed up in his expansive home on the outskirts of town. But as the walls closed in around him, Thompson made a desperate bid for freedom. It was a crisp autumn morning when Thompson's neighbor noticed something odd. A taxi idling in the driveway, Thompson loading suitcases into the trunk. A quick call to the authorities set in motion a chain of events that would captivate the town once more. As Thompson's taxi approached the airport, it found itself suddenly boxed in by police cruisers. Officers swarmed the vehicle, weapons drawn. Thompson, his face ashen, raised his hands in surrender. The image of the once proud principal being led away in handcuffs, his flight to freedom cut short, would grace the front page of the Westview Gazette the next day. Amidst the chaos, John Matthews found himself cast in an unexpected role, that of reluctant hero. Reform-minded community leaders, seeing in John a symbol of integrity and courage, approached him with a proposition. "We need someone like you on the school board, John," said Margaret Holbrook, a longtime advocate for educational reform. "Someone who's not afraid to stand up to corruption, who puts the students first." John listened to their impassioned pleas, feeling a mixture of pride and unease. He had exposed the rot at the core of Westview High, yes, but at what cost? The school he had loved, the community he had called home for so long. Both were now in turmoil because of his actions. As John grappled with the unexpected consequences of his revenge, another player entered the game. Melissa Chun, John's partner in the intricate dance of retribution, saw an opportunity in the chaos. "John, my company is prepared to make an offer on the land," Melissa said, her voice cool and businesslike over the phone. "We'll pay above market value, and we're promising to work with the community on a revised expansion plan. It's a win-win." John hesitated, torn between the potential financial windfall and the nagging feeling that he owed something to the community he had inadvertently thrown into turmoil. "I'll think about it, Melissa," he said finally. "But I want to do something for the students who've been caught in the crossfire of all this." That night, as John pored over financial documents and legal papers, an idea began to take shape. By morning, he had the outlines of a plan, a scholarship fund for students affected by the canceled expansion. It wouldn't fix everything, but it was a start. As John worked to establish the fund, he received an unexpected message. It was from Sarah, her words tinged with desperation. "John, I know I have no right to ask, but I need help. I'm facing potential criminal charges. Please, if there's anything you can do." John stared at the message for a long time, a storm of emotions raging within him. Finally, he typed out a response, his fingers heavy on the keys. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but I can't get involved. Here's the contact information for a good legal aid organization. I hope you find the help you need." As he hit send, John felt a chapter of his life closing definitively. Whatever happened next, there was no going back to the way things were before. The halls of Westview High School, once bustling with the energy of nearly 2,000 students, now echoed with an eerie emptiness. In the wake of the scandal, enrollment had plummeted. Parents, concerned about the school's reputation and the quality of education their children would receive, had begun transferring their kids to neighboring districts or private schools. Lisa Hernandez, a senior and one of John's former star pupils, walked through the quiet corridors, her footsteps echoing off the lockers. She remembered the day Mr. Matthews had encouraged her to join the school paper, praising her keen eye for detail and passion for uncovering the truth. Now, as editor-in-chief of the Westview Chronicle, she found herself at the center of the biggest story in the school's history. "We can't let this be how our school is remembered," Lisa said to her small but dedicated team of student journalists. "We need to do something to save Westview High." With the passion and idealism of youth, Lisa and her friends launched a campaign to restore the school's standing. They organized rallies, created social media campaigns, and wrote impassioned editorials about the school's long history of academic excellence and community involvement. Their efforts didn't go unnoticed. Local news outlets picked up the story of the students fighting to save their school, providing a counterpoint to the ongoing scandal coverage. Slowly but surely, Lisa and her team began to shift the narrative. John watched these developments from afar, a mixture of pride and guilt swirling in his chest. He had always known Lisa was special, but seeing her rise to this challenge filled him with a bittersweet joy. Without her knowledge, he made an anonymous donation to support the students' campaign. But even as Lisa and her classmates fought to save Westview High, darker clouds were gathering on the horizon. State education officials, alerted by the scandal and concerned about the school's ability to provide adequate education, began an audit of the entire district. "If the audit findings are negative, we may have no choice but to dissolve the current board and place the schools under direct state control," the lead auditor informed a grim-faced group of board members. The news sent shockwaves through the community. State control would mean a loss of local decision-making power, potentially drastic changes to staff and curriculum, and a stigma that could take years to overcome. As the audit progressed, John found himself torn. He had set out to expose corruption and get justice, but the consequences were spiraling far beyond anything he had anticipated. Innocent students and dedicated teachers were suffering because of his actions. His phone buzzed with a message from Melissa. "John, we need to talk. There's a potential problem with our plan." They met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, away from prying eyes and ears. Melissa's usually composed face was etched with worry. "If our behind-the-scenes manipulation comes to light, we could be facing serious legal repercussions," she said, her voice low. "The way we orchestrated those construction delays, the environmental concerns we raised, it's all skating very close to fraud." John felt the weight of her words settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. He had been so focused on bringing down Thompson and the corrupt administration that he hadn't fully considered the legal implications of his own actions. As he left the cafe, John's mind raced. The school he loved was on the brink of state takeover. His own legal jeopardy loomed large. And through it all, the faces of his former students, Lisa, fighting so hard to save the school. Others, their educations disrupted by the chaos he had unleashed, haunted him. John realized he was standing at a crossroads. He could continue to watch from the sidelines as the community he once called home tore itself apart, or he could step forward and take responsibility for his role in the unfolding drama. The decision, he knew, would not be an easy one, but as he walked home through the streets of Westview, past the school that had been his life for so many years, John began to see the outlines of a path forward, a path that would require courage, humility, and a willingness to face the consequences of his actions. The Westview Community Center was packed to capacity, a sea of familiar faces filled with a mixture of anger, confusion, and hope. The town hall meeting to discuss the future of Westview High School had drawn nearly every resident, all anxious to have their say in what had become the defining crisis of their community. John Matthews sat in the back, his heart pounding. He had spent the last week agonizing over his decision, weighing the potential consequences against the burden of his guilt. Now, as he watched his friends and neighbors argue passionately about the fate of the school, he knew what he had to do. As the current board president wrapped up her opening remarks, John stood and made his way to the podium. A hush fell over the crowd as they recognized him, whispers rippling through the audience. "Thank you for allowing me to speak," John began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I know many of you are wondering why I'm here. The truth is, I owe all of you an explanation and an apology." Over the next hour, John laid bare the entire story. His discovery of Sarah's affair, his plan for revenge, the manipulation of the construction project, everything. As he spoke, he could see the shock and disbelief on the faces before him. But he pressed on, determined to tell the whole truth. "I set out to expose corruption, to get justice for what I saw as a betrayal of trust," John said, his voice thick with emotion. "But in doing so, I became the very thing I despised. I manipulated, I schemed, I put my desire for revenge above the well-being of the students and this community. For that, I am deeply sorry." The room erupted into chaos as John finished speaking. Some shouted accusations. Others defended him as a whistleblower who had exposed real corruption. Through it all, John stood silently at the podium, accepting the community's reaction as part of his penance. When the furor died down, John spoke again. "I know my words alone can't fix the damage I've caused. That's why I'm here to offer more than just an apology. I'm prepared to fully fund the school expansion without any conditions, using my partnership with Melissa Chen's development company to ensure its completion. It's not much, but I hope it's a start towards making things right." The offer sent another wave of murmurs through the crowd. As the implications of John's proposal sank in, the mood in the room began to shift. While some remained angry, others saw a potential way forward, a chance to salvage something positive from the scandal. As the meeting continued, an unexpected voice joined the conversation. Sarah Matthews, who had been sitting quietly in a corner, stood up. "I, too, have a confession to make," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "Everything John said about my involvement with Principal Thompson is true. I was weak, I was greedy, and I betrayed not just my husband but this entire community. I'm prepared to provide additional details to the authorities to help build a stronger case against Thompson and anyone else involved in the corruption." Sarah's confession stunned the room into silence. For a moment, it seemed as if the weight of all that had happened, the betrayals, the lies, the upheaval, hung heavily in the air. Then, slowly, a new mood began to take hold. One of cautious hope, of a community ready to begin the difficult work of healing. As the meeting drew to a close, the board president took the podium once more. "Given the complexity of the situation and the need for our community to heal and move forward, I propose we form a task force. This group, made up of educators, parents, and students, will oversee the expansion project and work to restore faith in our school system." The proposal was met with nods of agreement and a smattering of applause. As people began to file out of the community center, many stopped to speak with John, some to express anger, others to offer forgiveness or thanks for his honesty. One of the last to approach him was Lisa Hernandez. "Mr. Matthews," she said, her eyes filled with a mixture of disappointment and respect, "I don't know how to feel about all this, but I do know that your lessons about integrity and standing up for what's right are part of what inspired us to fight for our school. Thank you for telling the truth, even though it was hard." John felt a lump form in his throat. "Thank you, Lisa. Your campaign to save the school, it's been inspiring. I hope you'll consider joining the task force. They'll need strong voices like yours." As John prepared to leave, the board president approached him. "John, we'd like you to consider taking a position on the task force. Your insight could be valuable." John shook his head. "I appreciate the offer, but I think it's best if I step back. The healing needs to come from the community itself." He paused, considering his next words carefully. However, I'd like to offer to fund an independent ethics committee for the district, something to help ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. In the weeks and months that followed, Westview began the slow process of rebuilding, not just the physical expansion of the school, but the trust and sense of community that had been shattered by the scandal. John, finding a measure of peace in his confession and attempts to make amends, chose to step back from the spotlight. He began volunteering at a youth center in a neighboring town, working with at-risk teens, and finding a new sense of purpose in helping guide young people. Sarah, facing the consequences of her actions but also finding unexpected support in the wake of her confession, started rebuilding her life. She found work at a local homeless shelter, the experience of losing everything giving her a new empathy for those struggling to get back on their feet. One crisp autumn morning, a year after the scandal had first broken, Lisa Hernandez sat in the newly constructed wing of Westview High School. Now the editor of the school paper, she was preparing to interview the new principal about the upcoming school year. As she waited, Lisa glanced out the window at the bustling campus. Students streamed into the new buildings, laughter and chatter filling the air. The shadow of the scandal still lingered, but there was a palpable sense of renewal, of a community that had faced its darkest hour and emerged stronger. Lisa smiled to herself as she turned back to her notebook, ready to document the next chapter in Westview's story. The past couldn't be changed, but the future, full of challenges and opportunities, was theirs to write. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.